I went to my son's office to surprise him on his birthday. As I entered, I heard my daughter-in-law sneer, "She won't live long enough to enjoy our success. Soon, even the house will be ours." My blood froze when I saw what lay hidden in his desk drawer. The morning had started so differently. I'd spent 2 hours in my kitchen.
Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching.
Carefully preparing Richard's favorite chocolate cake from scratch, the same recipe I'd used for his birthdays since he was 7. At 66, my hands weren't as steady as they once were, but I managed to pipe "Happy 45th Birthday" in perfect blue frosting letters. The cake sat in a pristine white box on my passenger seat as I drove through the familiar streets toward his law firm. Richard had been distant lately, our phone calls shorter, his visits more infrequent. I told myself it was normal. Successful attorneys are busy people, and he'd been working on some big case involving real estate acquisitions. Still, a mother notices when her son's voice lacks warmth, when his "love you too" sounds more like obligation than affection. The receptionist at Morrison, Patterson and Associates smiled when she saw me. "Mrs. Henderson, here to see Richard? It's his birthday," I explained, lifting the cake box. "I thought I'd surprise him." "He's in his office with Mrs. Henderson. Go right ahead." Mrs. Henderson. Even after 3 years of marriage, hearing Stephanie called by my late husband's name still felt strange. She'd insisted on taking Richard's surname immediately after their wedding, something that had touched me at the time. Now I wondered if it was just another calculated move in whatever game she'd been playing. I approached Richard's corner office, my sensible shoes silent on the thick carpet. The door was slightly ajar, and I could hear voices inside. I was about to knock when Stephanie's words stopped me cold. "Really, Richard, you need to stop feeling guilty. She's 66 years old. How much longer could she possibly have? 5 years? 10 at most?" My son's voice was quieter, uncertain. "Stephanie, that's my mother you're talking about. And she's standing between us and everything we deserve. That house alone is worth $2 million, not to mention her investment portfolio. Your father left her everything, and she's just sitting on it like some dragon guarding treasure." I pressed closer to the door, my heart hammering against my ribs. This couldn't be the conversation I was hearing. This had to be some misunderstanding. "She earned that money," Richard said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Dad built that construction business from nothing, and she worked alongside him for 30 years. Stephanie's laugh was sharp, cruel. "Worked alongside him?" She answered phones and made coffee. "That's not building a business, Richard. That's being a secretary who got lucky enough to marry the boss." The cake box trembled in my hands. I wanted to burst through that door, to defend myself, to remind them that I'd kept the books, managed payroll, negotiated with suppliers when James was out on job sites. I'd worked 18-hour days during those early years, sacrificing everything for the family business. "The point is," Stephanie continued, "we shouldn't have to wait for nature to take its course. She won't live long enough to enjoy our success anyway. Soon even the house will be ours." Something in her tone made my blood freeze. There was a certainty there, a knowledge that went beyond wishful thinking. I leaned closer to the crack in the door, and through it I could see Richard's desk. Stephanie was standing behind him, her manicured hands on his shoulders. Richard was hunched over an open drawer, and in that drawer I could see papers, documents, and something else. Something that made absolutely no sense. A small glass vial filled with clear liquid. Next to it lay a syringe and what looked like medical instructions printed from the internet. I squinted, trying to read the heading, and my world tilted on its axis. Digitalis toxicity. Symptoms and dosage. My legs nearly gave out. Digitalis. I knew that name from my garden club meetings. Mrs. Patterson had warned us all about foxglove plants, how beautiful they were and how deadly. She'd mentioned that digitalis was the poison derived from them, sometimes used in heart medications but lethal in larger doses. "The symptoms will look completely natural," Stephanie was saying, her voice taking on an almost clinical tone. "Fatigue, confusion, nausea. Everyone will assume it's just old age catching up with her. Then the heart palpitations will start, and by then—" "Stop," Richard interrupted, but he didn't sound horrified. He sounded tired, like they'd had this conversation before. "Richard, we've been through this. She's suffering. Look how frail she's become lately. How confused. Wouldn't it be merciful to let her go peacefully before she gets worse? Frail. Confused. I thought about the past few months, how I'd been feeling unusually tired after our family dinners, how I'd had trouble remembering things afterward, felt dizzy and nauseous. I'd attributed it to age, to the stress of missing James, to the natural decline that comes with being a widow in her 60s. But what if it wasn't natural at all? The birthday party tonight is perfect, Stephanie continued. Everyone will be there, all her friends from church and the neighborhood. We'll give a beautiful toast to family, to love, to the future. She'll drink her champagne, and in a few hours, she'll just quietly slip away. It'll look like her heart simply gave out from all the excitement. The cake box slipped from my numb fingers, hitting the carpet with a soft thud. Both voices in the office stopped abruptly. "What was that?" Richard asked. I fled. There was no other word for it. I turned and ran down that carpeted hallway like a woman half my age, past the confused receptionist, through the glass doors, and into the parking lot where I sat in my car shaking uncontrollably. My own son, my Richard, the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who'd cried when his hamster died, who'd called me every day during his first year of law school because he was homesick, that Richard was sitting in his office discussing the best way to murder his mother. And tonight, at his birthday party, in front of all our friends and family, they were planning to poison me. I drove home in a daze, my mind struggling to process what I'd just witnessed. The familiar streets of Maplewood seemed foreign now, like I was seeing them through someone else's eyes. Everything looked the same, but everything had changed. My son wanted me dead, and his wife was planning to make it happen. Back in my kitchen, I stared at the ingredients still scattered across the counter from making Richard's cake. Flour, sugar, eggs, simple things that represented love, tradition, the normal life I thought I'd been living. Now they seemed like props in a play I hadn't known I was performing in. I needed to think clearly, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I made myself a cup of tea, the routine motion helping to calm my nerves slightly. As I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd helped Richard with homework 20 years ago, I forced myself to really examine the past few months. The fatigue had started around Christmas. I'd blamed it on the holiday stress, the loneliness of my first Christmas without James. But now I remembered how it had gotten worse after family dinners at Richard's house. Stephanie always insisted on cooking, always made such a fuss about me not lifting a finger. "You've done enough cooking in your lifetime, Linda," she'd say with that sweet smile of hers. "Let me take care of you now." Had she been taking care of me? Or had she been slowly poisoning me all along? I thought about the dizzy spells, the nausea that would come on suddenly during our visits, the way I'd started feeling confused afterward, forgetting conversations we'd had, or things I'd planned to do. Richard had started looking at me with concern, suggesting maybe I should see a doctor about my memory. "Mom, you told me that story 3 times today," he'd said just last weekend. But had I? Or was that what Stephanie had told him I'd done? My phone rang, startling me out of my thoughts. Richard's name appeared on the screen. For a moment I considered not answering, but I needed to act normal. They couldn't know that I knew. "Hi, sweetheart," I managed, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "Mom, hey, listen. I think you might have dropped something at the office earlier. The receptionist said you came by?" My heart pounded. "Oh, yes. I brought you a birthday cake. I left it in my car when I realized you were in a meeting. I didn't want to interrupt." A pause. "You should have come in. You know you're always welcome." The lie came so easily to him. "I know, honey. I just thought it might be work-related. The cake is still here if you want to pick it up later. Actually, why don't you just bring it tonight? To the party? The party, where they plan to kill me. Of course. I'm looking forward to it." After I hung up, I sat staring at the phone. Richard had sounded normal, loving even. Was this really the same man who'd been discussing my murder an hour ago? How long had they been planning this? How long had my son been pretending to care about me while wishing I was dead? I walked to my bedroom and pulled out the shoebox where I kept important documents. Insurance policies, the deed to the house, bank statements, all the papers that represented the fortune James had left me. $4 million in various investments, plus the house worth another $2 million. $6 million that stood between my son and whatever life he thought he deserved. But it wasn't just the money, was it? I remembered Stephanie's words about me being a dragon guarding treasure. What else had she said to Richard? What poison had she been dripping in his ear about his own mother? I found my address book and called my oldest friend, Carol Patterson. We'd been neighbors for 30 years before she moved across town to be closer to her grandchildren. Linda, how lovely to hear from you. Are you ready for Richard's party tonight? Carol, I need to ask you something, and it might sound strange. Have you noticed anything different about me lately? When we have lunch or go to church together, a pause. Different how? I don't know. Forgetful? Confused? Richard seems to think I'm having some kind of memory issues. Memory issues? Carol's voice was sharp with surprise. Linda, you have the sharpest mind of anyone I know. Just last week you remembered the exact date of my grandson's science fair from 3 months ago. Why would Richard say that? Because Stephanie had been feeding him lies, I realized, making him believe I was declining mentally to justify what they were planning to do. Has Stephanie ever said anything to you about my health? I asked. Well, Carol hesitated. She did mention at the church potluck last month that she was worried about you. Said you'd been getting confused during family dinners, repeating yourself. She seemed very concerned, actually. Said she was trying to convince you to see a doctor. My blood ran cold. Stephanie had been laying the groundwork for months, maybe longer, creating a narrative about my declining mental state, preparing everyone for my eventual, natural death. Carol, if something happens to me, Linda, what's wrong? You're scaring me. I caught myself. I couldn't involve Carol in this. Not yet. I needed to be smarter, more careful. Nothing's wrong. I'm just feeling a bit overwhelmed lately. All this talk about doctors and memory problems. After I hung up, I walked through my house with new eyes. This beautiful colonial that James and I had bought 30 years ago, where we'd raised Richard, where we'd planned to grow old together. Stephanie was right about one thing. It was worth a fortune now. The Maplewood neighborhood had become increasingly desirable, and our corner lot with the mature oak trees was probably worth even more than $2 million. But it wasn't just an asset to me. It was home. It was the kitchen where I'd made thousands of meals, the living room where Richard had opened Christmas presents, the garden where James had taught him to throw a baseball. Every room held memories that couldn't be appraised or sold. In my husband's old study, I found his desk drawer where he used to keep his business documents. Hidden in the back was something I'd forgotten about, a small digital recorder he'd used for dictating letters to his secretary. I turned it on, and it still worked. An idea began to form. If Stephanie wanted to play games with evidence, I could play too. I spent the afternoon researching digitalis on my computer. What I found terrified me. In small doses over time, it could cause exactly the symptoms I'd been experiencing: fatigue, confusion, nausea. But a larger dose, especially mixed with alcohol, could cause heart arrhythmias severe enough to kill. It was the perfect poison for someone who wanted to commit the perfect murder. And tonight, at Richard's birthday party, in front of everyone who mattered to me, they were planning to use it. I looked at myself in my bedroom mirror. At 66, I wasn't the young woman who'd fallen in love with James Henderson 40 years ago. My brown hair was silver now, my face lined with years of laughter and worry. But my mind was still sharp, despite what Stephanie had been telling people. And tonight, I was going to prove it. I opened my closet and selected my navy blue dress, the one James had always said was his favorite. If this was going to be my last party, I was going to look my best. But more importantly, I was going to be ready. I had 6 hours until the party started. 6 hours to prepare for the fight of my life. I spent the next 2 hours doing something I never thought I'd have to do: investigating my own family. Sitting at James's old computer, I searched through every piece of information I could find about Stephanie Morrison before she became Stephanie Henderson. What I discovered made my stomach turn. Before marrying Richard, Stephanie had been married once before to a man named David Morrison, 15 years her senior. He'd died of a heart attack at age 52, leaving her a substantial life insurance payout. The obituary mentioned his sudden decline in health over the final months of his life. Fatigue, confusion, heart palpitations, the same symptoms I'd been experiencing. I dug deeper. Stephanie's maiden name was Cooper, and she'd grown up in foster care after her parents died when she was 12. No family, no roots, no one to miss her if she disappeared. But she'd been smart enough to reinvent herself, to target men with money, and then wait patiently for them to die. Richard wasn't her second husband. He was her third victim. My hands were shaking as I printed out everything I'd found. David Morrison's obituary, Stephanie's previous marriage records, her employment history showing a pattern of working for older, wealthy men before marrying them. She was a predator, and she'd selected my son as her next mark. But Richard wasn't some innocent victim. The conversation I'd overheard made that clear. He knew exactly what Stephanie was planning, and he was going along with it. My own son had chosen money over his mother's life. I made myself face that horrible truth. The boy who used to bring me dandelions and call them flowers, who'd cried when he accidentally stepped on a butterfly, had grown into a man who could calmly discuss murdering his mother for inheritance money. The phone rang again. This time, it was Stephanie herself. "Linda, I just wanted to check that you're still planning to come tonight. Richard was worried you might not be feeling well after your visit to his office." Her voice was warm, caring, perfectly modulated to sound like a concerned daughter-in-law. If I hadn't heard her planning my death a few hours ago, I might have been touched by her apparent concern. "I'm feeling much better now, dear. I wouldn't miss Richard's birthday for anything." "Wonderful. I've planned such a special evening. All your friends will be there. Carol, the Johnsons from church, your book club ladies. It's going to be perfect. Perfect." She wanted an audience for my death. The more people who witnessed my natural passing, the more believable it would be. "What can I bring?" I asked. "Besides the cake, of course." "Oh, don't worry about bringing anything else. I have everything handled. Just bring yourself and be ready to celebrate." After she hung up, I sat staring at the phone. Stephanie's enthusiasm was chilling. She was actually excited about killing me tonight. This wasn't some desperate act of passion. It was cold, calculated murder, and she was looking forward to it. I walked to my kitchen and opened the drawer where I kept my medication. Blood pressure pills, calcium supplements, the usual collection of prescriptions that come with being over 60. I looked at each bottle carefully, wondering if Stephanie had somehow tampered with them. Had my recent fatigue been caused by something she'd added to my pills? I made a decision. Starting right now, I wouldn't take any medication, eat any food, or drink anything that could have been tampered with. If I was going to survive tonight, I needed my mind completely clear. The digital recorder sat on my kitchen counter like a small weapon. I tested it several times, making sure I knew how to operate it quickly and quietly. The plan forming in my mind was dangerous, but it might be my only chance. I would go to the party. I would act normal, play the role of the loving mother and grandmother they expected. But I would also record everything. And when Stephanie tried to poison me, I would be ready. My doorbell rang at 4 o'clock. Through the peephole, I saw my neighbor Mrs. Chen holding a casserole dish. "Linda, I made extra lasagna and thought you might like some for dinner before Richard's party." Under normal circumstances, I would have been grateful. Mrs. Chen was a sweet woman who'd been looking out for me since James died. But now I wondered, had Stephanie asked her to bring me food? Was this another way to get poison into my system before the party? "That's so thoughtful of you," I said, accepting the dish but making no promises to eat it. "I'll heat it up later." After she left, I stared at the innocent-looking lasagna. Was I becoming paranoid? Was this what Stephanie wanted, for me to doubt everyone and everything until I seemed genuinely unstable? I put the casserole in the refrigerator untouched and made myself a peanut butter sandwich instead, using ingredients I'd bought myself and kept sealed until now. At 5 o'clock, I started getting ready. I showered and styled my silver hair the way James had always liked it, swept up but with soft waves around my face. I put on makeup carefully, wanting to look healthy and alert, not like a confused old woman whose time had come. The navy dress still fit perfectly. James had bought it for me on our 30th anniversary, just 2 years before the cancer took him. I fastened my pearl necklace, the one he'd given me when Richard was born. If tonight went badly, at least I'd be wearing symbols of the love we'd shared. I slipped the digital recorder into my purse, along with the papers I'd printed about Stephanie's past. Evidence that might save my life, or at least ensure justice if I didn't survive the evening. At 6:30, I was ready. I looked at myself one final time in the full-length mirror in my bedroom. I looked like a woman going to a birthday party, not someone preparing for battle. That was exactly what I wanted. I picked up Richard's birthday cake and walked to my car. The evening air was crisp with the promise of autumn, and the maple trees on my street were just beginning to turn red and gold. It might be the last time I saw my neighborhood, but I pushed that thought away. I wasn't going to die tonight. I was going to fight. The drive to Richard's house took 15 minutes through familiar streets lined with well-maintained homes. This was the neighborhood where successful people lived, where lawyers and doctors and business owners raised their families behind perfectly manicured lawns. It was the neighborhood where I'd thought my son had found happiness. Now I knew the truth. Richard's beautiful house, his successful law practice, his seemingly perfect marriage. It was all built on lies and planned murder. I parked in his circular driveway behind several other cars. Through the front windows, I could see people already gathered in the living room, holding wine glasses and chatting. My friends, people who cared about me, people who would witness whatever happened tonight. I sat in my car for a moment, gathering my courage. This could be the last normal moment of my life. In a few hours, I would either have exposed a murderer and saved myself, or I would be dead. I reached into my purse and turned on the digital recorder. Then I picked up the birthday cake and walked toward the front door of what might be my son's house, or my tomb. The porch light was on, welcoming guests to what Stephanie had called a perfect evening. Through the frosted glass of the front door, I could see shapes moving inside, hear the sound of laughter and conversation. I rang the doorbell, and within seconds it opened to reveal Stephanie in a stunning red cocktail dress, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her smile radiant. "Linda, you look absolutely beautiful. Come in, come in. Everyone's been waiting for you." She embraced me warmly, and I forced myself not to recoil from the touch of the woman who planned to kill me. Her perfume was expensive and cloying, and I wondered if this would be the last scent I ever smelled. "Thank you, dear. The house looks lovely," and it did. Stephanie had decorated beautifully, with white roses and silver ribbons everywhere. Soft jazz played in the background, and servers in black and white uniforms moved through the crowd offering hors d'oeuvres and champagne. Champagne. The weapon she'd chosen to deliver my death. "Let me take that cake to the kitchen," Stephanie said. "Richard will be so touched that you made his favorite." I handed over the cake, wondering if I'd ever see it again. Then I walked into the living room to greet the people who'd come to celebrate my son's birthday, not knowing they were about to become witnesses to attempted murder. The living room was filled with familiar faces, people who'd been part of my life for decades. Carol Patterson waved from near the fireplace, where she was talking with the Johnsons from our church. My book club friends clustered around the piano, admiring the family photos Stephanie had arranged on top. Everyone looked happy, relaxed, enjoying what they believed was simply a birthday celebration. If only they knew they were about to witness an attempted murder. "Linda," Carol hurried over to embrace me. "You look wonderful. That dress is stunning on you." "Thank you. It was one of James's favorites." "Richard's so lucky to have a mother who still makes his birthday cakes from scratch. Stephanie was just telling us how much work you put into it." I glanced toward the kitchen, where I could see Stephanie talking animatedly with one of the servers. Was she giving special instructions about my champagne? Making sure the poisoned glass found its way to me? "Have you seen Richard yet?" Carol asked. "Not yet. I just arrived." As if summoned by our conversation, Richard appeared in the archway between the living room and dining room. At 45, he was still handsome in the way that had made him popular in high school and successful in his law practice. Tall, dark-haired, with James's strong jaw and my green eyes. But tonight, those eyes couldn't quite meet mine. "Mom." He crossed the room and hugged me, And for just a moment, I let myself remember when those hugs were genuine, when my son loved me unconditionally. I'm so glad you came. I wouldn't miss your birthday, sweetheart. 45. I can hardly believe it. Time flies. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Stephanie's planned such a wonderful party. She wanted everything to be perfect for tonight. Perfect. That word again. I wondered if he could hear the double meaning, if he understood that perfect meant my death would look natural and unquestionable. She's very thoughtful, I managed to say. Richard nodded toward the kitchen. She's been working all week on the menu, the decorations, everything. She said she wanted tonight to be a celebration of family. A celebration of family, on the night they planned to murder the family matriarch. Richard, could I speak with you privately for a moment? I asked. Something flickered in his eyes. Fear? Guilt? Of course, Mom. Let's go to my study. I followed him through the dining room, past the elegant table set with Stephanie's best china and crystal, into the small room that served as his home office. He closed the door behind us, and suddenly we were alone for the first time since I'd overheard his conversation with Stephanie. What did you want to talk about? He asked, but he was avoiding my gaze, looking everywhere except directly at me. This was my son, the little boy I'd rocked to sleep, whose scraped knees I'd bandaged, whose dreams I'd encouraged. I wanted to grab him by the shoulders and shake him until the real Richard, my Richard, came back. Instead, I reached into my purse and turned on the digital recorder. I wanted to talk about your future, I said carefully. About what you want from life. My future? He looked confused. You and Stephanie seem so focused on building wealth, on success. Sometimes I wonder if you're truly happy. Richard relaxed slightly. Maybe he thought this was just another one of those mother-son conversations about finding meaning beyond money. We're very happy, Mom. Stephanie's been incredible for me. She's ambitious, driven. She helps me see opportunities I might miss otherwise. Opportunities like what? Like investments, real estate deals? She's got such a good eye for potential. He was warming to the subject now, and I could hear the admiration in his voice. Whatever else Stephanie had done, she'd genuinely captivated my son. She mentioned something about the house, I said, keeping my tone casual. My house, I mean. She seems to think it's worth quite a bit. Richard's face went carefully blank. Well, yes. The Maplewood market has really taken off. Your property is probably worth more than you realize. How much more? Mom, why are we talking about this? You're not thinking of selling, are you? I'm just curious about what I'm sitting on. Stephanie seemed very knowledgeable about real estate values. She is. She's actually been researching the market extensively. Richard moved to the window, looking out at his backyard rather than at me. She thinks your house could easily go for $2 million, maybe more with the right staging. That's a lot of money. It is. Enough to change someone's life completely. Mom, what's this really about? I took a deep breath. This was my chance to give him an opportunity to come clean, to choose his mother over his murderous wife. Richard, if something happened to me, what would happen to my estate? He turned from the window, and for the first time tonight, he looked directly at me. What do you mean if something happened to you? I'm 66 years old. I'm not going to live forever. Have you and Stephanie discussed what would happen to my assets when I die? The silence stretched between us. I could see the war happening behind his eyes. Conscience battling greed, love fighting against whatever poison Stephanie had been feeding him about me. You're in good health, Mom. You don't need to worry about that for years. But theoretically, if I died tomorrow, what would happen? You'd leave everything to me, like Dad's will specified. And how would you feel about that? Another long pause. I'd be devastated to lose you, but not devastated to inherit $6 million. Richard's face went white. $6 million? The house? The investments? The life insurance policies your father left me? It's all worth about $6 million now. I watched my son process this information. Did he know the exact figure? Had he and Stephanie calculated precisely how much my death would be worth to them? That's more than I realized. It's enough to pay off your mortgage, expand your law practice, buy Stephanie all the jewelry and designer clothes she wants. It's enough to live like royalty for the rest of your life. Mom, why are you telling me this? Because I want to know something, Richard. I want to know if you love me enough to wait for it. The question hung in the air between us. I could see him struggling with it, weighing his answer carefully. Before he could respond, there was a soft knock on the study door. Richard? Linda? Stephanie's voice was sweet, concerned. Everyone's asking for you. We're about to start the toasts. The toasts. The moment when she would hand me the poisoned champagne and watch me drink my own death. We'll be right there, Richard called back. I stood up, my legs steadier than I'd expected. Well, sweetheart, I guess it's time to celebrate. Richard nodded, but he looked like a man walking to his own execution rather than his birthday party. We returned to the living room, where Stephanie was directing the servers to distribute champagne flutes to all the guests. The crystal glasses caught the light from the chandelier, sparkling like diamonds. Beautiful and deadly. There you are. Stephanie hurried over to us, her smile radiant. I was getting worried. Everyone's so excited for the toasts. She handed Richard a glass of champagne, then turned to me with another flute. This one looked identical to all the others, but I knew it contained more than just champagne. Somewhere in that golden liquid was the digitalis that was supposed to stop my heart. Thank you, dear, I said, accepting the glass. The crystal was cool against my fingers, and I could smell the expensive champagne Stephanie had chosen for the occasion. My last drink, if her plan worked. Before we begin, Stephanie announced to the room, I just want to say how special tonight is, having all of you here to celebrate Richard's birthday, surrounded by the people who love him most. She looked directly at me as she said this, and I saw something in her eyes that chilled me. Anticipation, excitement. She was actually looking forward to watching me die. Family is everything, she continued, and sometimes the most loving thing we can do for family is to let them go when their time comes. Several guests nodded approvingly at this seemingly innocent sentiment. They had no idea they were listening to a murderer's manifesto. So let's raise our glasses to Richard, to family, and to the natural order of things. Everyone raised their champagne flutes. I raised mine as well, but I didn't drink. Not yet. To Richard, the room chorused. I watched as everyone else sipped their champagne. Normal, safe champagne that wouldn't kill them. Then all eyes turned to me, waiting for me to drink as well. This was the moment. I could feel Stephanie's gaze boring into me, willing me to lift that glass to my lips and swallow my own death. Instead, I set my glass down on the coffee table. Actually, before I drink, I'd like to make a toast of my own. Stephanie's smile faltered slightly. Of course, Linda. What a lovely idea. I reached into my purse and pulled out the digital recorder. Several guests looked puzzled, but I pressed play. My own voice filled the room, clear and strong. Richard, if something happened to me, what would happen to my estate? Then Richard's voice, you'd leave everything to me. Like Dad's will specified. And how would you feel about that? I'd be devastated to lose you. But not devastated to inherit $6 million. The room went dead silent. Everyone was staring at the recorder, then at Richard, then at me. I could see the confusion in their faces, the dawning realization that something was very wrong, but I wasn't finished. I pulled out the printed pages about Stephanie's past and held them up. I'd like to tell you all about Stephanie Morrison Henderson, about her first husband, David Morrison, who died of a heart attack at 52 after months of fatigue and confusion. About her pattern of marrying older men with money and then waiting patiently for them to die. Stephanie's face had gone from pink to pale to gray. Linda, what are you doing? I'm saving my life, I said simply. Then I picked up my champagne flute and held it high. This glass contains digitalis, a poison derived from foxglove plants. Stephanie planned to watch me drink it tonight, then watch me die of what would look like natural heart failure. The gasps and exclamations from my friends filled the room. Several people stepped away from Stephanie instinctively. Richard stood frozen, his own champagne glass trembling in his hand. That's insane, Stephanie said, but her voice was shaking. Linda, you're obviously having some kind of episode. Richard, call Dr. Patterson. Your mother needs help. No, I said firmly. What I need is justice. The silence in the room was deafening. 25 guests stood frozen, champagne glasses halfway to their lips, staring at me as if I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had. Maybe this was all some elaborate delusion brought on by grief and loneliness. But then I looked at Stephanie's face, and I knew I was right. Her perfect composure had cracked like a broken mirror. The sweet, caring daughter-in-law mask had slipped, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. Her hands were shaking as she set down her own champagne glass. "Linda, you're scaring everyone," she said, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "You're obviously confused. This is exactly what Richard and I have been worried about, these paranoid episodes, these wild accusations." Several guests looked uncertain now. Mrs. Johnson from church stepped forward slightly. "Linda, dear, maybe you should sit down. You look pale." "I'm not confused," I said firmly, "and I'm not paranoid. I went to Richard's office today to surprise him for his birthday. I overheard Stephanie telling him that I wouldn't live long enough to enjoy their success, that soon even the house would be theirs. I saw the poison in his desk drawer." Richard's champagne glass slipped from his nerveless fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor. The sound made everyone jump. "Richard!" Carol Patterson's voice was sharp with concern. "Is this true?" My son looked like a deer caught in headlights. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. I could see the war raging behind his eyes. The little boy who had once loved his mother unconditionally fighting against the man who had been manipulated into wanting her dead. "Tell them, Richard," I said gently. "Tell them about the digitalis. Tell them about Stephanie's plan to poison my champagne tonight." Richard's voice cracked. "I don't. This isn't." "Richard, don't say anything," Stephanie snapped, her mask slipping further. "She's obviously having a psychotic break. We need to call 911 and have her committed for evaluation." But the damage was already done. Everyone in the room had heard Richard's recorded voice talking about inheriting $6 million. They'd seen him drop his glass when I mentioned the poison. His guilt was written across his face in letters large enough for everyone to read. "Is it true?" The question came from Judge Morrison, Richard's senior partner at the law firm. His voice was cold, professional. "Did you conspire to murder your mother?" "No." The word exploded from Richard like a gunshot. "I mean, it wasn't supposed to be murder," Stephanie said. "She said Mom was suffering, that she was getting confused, losing her memory. She said it would be merciful to let her go peacefully." The admission hung in the air like smoke. Several guests gasped. Mrs. Chen, my sweet neighbor who had brought me lasagna just hours ago, pressed her hand to her mouth in horror. "Merciful?" I repeated the word carefully. "Richard, look at me. Do I look like I'm suffering? Do I seem confused or ready to die?" He looked at me then, really looked at me for the first time in months. I saw the exact moment when the fog of Stephanie's manipulation began to clear from his eyes. "No," he whispered. You look fine. You look healthy. Because I am healthy. Because I stopped eating food Stephanie prepared and stopped taking the medication she said my doctor prescribed. Because I realized she's been slowly poisoning me for months to make me appear sick and confused." "That's impossible," Stephanie said, but her voice lacked conviction now. "Richard, don't listen to her. She's manipulating you, making you doubt everything we've built together." "What we've built together?" I turned to face her directly. "You mean your plan to murder me for my money? Because that's what this is, Stephanie. Not mercy, not kindness. Cold-blooded murder for financial gain." I held up the papers about her past again. "David Morrison wasn't your only victim, was he? You've done this before. Found wealthy older men, married them, then waited for them to die mysteriously of heart problems." "Those are lies," Stephanie said, but she was backing toward the kitchen now, looking for an escape route. "Are they? Should we call the police and let them investigate? I'm sure they'd be very interested in examining David Morrison's death, in testing his body for traces of digitalis. I'm sure they'd want to question his doctors about his sudden decline in health." Judge Morrison stepped forward, his face grave. "Linda, have you contacted the authorities about this?" "Not yet. I wanted to give Richard a chance to choose, to decide whether he loves his mother enough to protect her from his murderous wife." All eyes turned to Richard. He stood in the middle of his living room, surrounded by his birthday guests, facing the biggest decision of his life. Choose his mother and lose his wife and her promise of easy wealth, or choose Stephanie and become an accessory to murder. Richard, Stephanie's voice was soft now, pleading. You know me. You know I would never hurt anyone. Your mother is sick, confused. She needs help, not accusations. Richard, I said quietly, look at the evidence. Look at my medical records versus what Stephanie has been telling people. Look at her past, her pattern of targeting wealthy older men. Look at the poison in your desk drawer. What does your heart tell you? My son closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them, they were filled with tears. The poison was Stephanie's idea, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. She said you were suffering, that watching you decline was breaking my heart. She said it would be kinder to let you go quickly than to watch you waste away. And you believed her? I wanted to believe her. God help me, Mom. I wanted to believe her because... His voice broke completely. Because I wanted the money. Because I was tired of waiting for my inheritance. Because Stephanie made me feel like I deserved it. Like you were being selfish by living. The confession hit me like a physical blow. To hear my own son admit that he'd wanted me dead for money was almost more than I could bear. But looking at you now, Richard continued, tears streaming down his face, you're not sick. You're not confused. You're my mother, the woman who raised me, who sacrificed everything for me. And I almost... God, what have I done? Richard, stop, Stephanie commanded, her voice sharp with desperation. You're just upset. You don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying. Richard turned to face his wife, and for the first time since I'd known her, Stephanie looked afraid. I'm saying that I was willing to murder my own mother because you convinced me she was better off dead. I'm saying that you're a manipulative, greedy killer who used my love for you to turn me into a monster. That's not true, isn't it? Judge Morrison's voice cut through Stephanie's protest like a blade. Mrs. Henderson, I think it would be wise for you to remain silent until you can consult with an attorney. Stephanie's eyes darted around the room, looking for allies, for anyone who might believe her version of events. But everyone was staring at her with horror and disgust. The carefully constructed image of the loving daughter-in-law had been shattered beyond repair. This is ridiculous, she said, trying one last desperate gambit. You're all taking the word of a confused old woman over someone you've known for 3 years. Linda is obviously having some kind of breakdown. Then you won't mind if we test the champagne, I said calmly. If I'm wrong, if there's no digitalis in my glass, then you can have me committed and everyone will know I've lost my mind. But if I'm right, there's no need to test anything, Richard said quietly. She's right. The digitalis is there. I saw Stephanie put it in Mom's glass while she was talking to the servers. The final piece of evidence, the last nail in Stephanie's coffin. Carol Patterson pulled out her cell phone. I'm calling 911. Wait, Stephanie said, her voice rising to a shriek. You don't understand. She's not some innocent victim. Do you know how much money she's sitting on? $6 million that she's hoarding while her own son struggles to build his career. She's selfish, greedy. She doesn't deserve to live in luxury while younger people work their hearts out for nothing. The words poured out of her like poison from a broken container. All the hatred and resentment she'd been hiding behind her sweet smile came spilling out. She's had her life. She's old, she's alone, she has no purpose anymore. What's the point of her living another 10 or 15 years when that money could do so much good for people who actually matter? The room erupted in shocked exclamations. Several guests stepped away from Stephanie as if she were radioactive. People who actually matter? Mrs. Johnson's voice was ice cold. Linda matters. She's been part of this community for 30 years. She raised a son, built a business with her husband, volunteered at the church and the library. What gives you the right to decide who deserves to live? The right of someone young enough to make a difference, Stephanie screamed. The right of someone who isn't just taking up space, waiting to die. And there it was, the truth behind the sweet smiles and caring gestures. Stephanie didn't just want my money. She genuinely believed that older people were worthless, that their lives had no value. Stephanie Morrison Henderson, Judge Morrison said formally, I'm placing you under citizen's arrest for conspiracy to commit murder and attempted murder. You can't do that. I haven't actually killed anyone. Yet, I said quietly. You haven't killed anyone yet. Richard stepped forward, his face pale but determined. Your Honor, I need to confess my role in this. I knew what Stephanie was planning. I didn't stop her. I'm as guilty as she is. Richard, no, I said quickly. You were manipulated. You were a victim too. I was a willing victim, Mom. I let my greed and her manipulation turn me into someone who could stand by while his own mother was murdered. There's no excuse for that. Judge Morrison nodded grimly. We'll let the police and the district attorney sort out degrees of culpability. Right now, the important thing is that a crime has been prevented. Carol finished her call to 911. Police and paramedics are on their way. They want everyone to stay exactly where they are until they arrive. I looked around the room at my friends and neighbors. These people had come to celebrate Richard's birthday and ended up witnessing the exposure of a murder plot. Their faces showed shock, horror, sympathy, and something else, respect. They were looking at me like I was a hero instead of a confused old woman. For the first time in months, I felt strong. The police arrived within 10 minutes, their red and blue lights painting the walls of Richard's elegant living room in harsh, official colors. What had started as a birthday celebration had become a crime scene, complete with yellow tape and evidence bags. Detective Sarah Martinez took my statement first, her expression growing more grim with each detail I provided. She was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner that reminded me of my younger self. Mrs. Henderson, I want you to know how brave you were tonight, she said as she finished writing. Most people in your situation wouldn't have had the presence of mind to gather evidence and confront their attackers so methodically. I had good motivation, I replied. Fear of death tends to focus the mind wonderfully. The detective smiled at that. Indeed it does. We're going to need to test the champagne, of course, and examine the materials found in your son's office. But based on the confession we just heard, I don't think there will be much doubt about Mrs. Henderson's guilt. Stephanie sat in the corner of the living room, handcuffed and flanked by 2 officers. Gone was the polished, sophisticated woman who had hosted elegant dinner parties and charmed everyone she met. In her place was someone smaller, diminished, showing her true age and the hardness that had always lurked behind her beautiful smile. She wasn't crying or pleading anymore. Instead, she stared at me with naked hatred, as if I had somehow wronged her by refusing to die quietly. This isn't over, she said as they prepared to lead her to the patrol car. You think you've won something, but you haven't. You're still just a lonely old woman with no purpose. At least when I killed you, your death would have meant something. Now you'll just waste away for another decade, taking up space that someone else could use. The venom in her words was startling, but I found they didn't hurt me as much as I'd expected. Perhaps because I finally understood that her cruelty said nothing about me and everything about the emptiness inside her. Stephanie, I said quietly, I hope someday you understand that every person's life has value, regardless of their age. I hope prison gives you time to find whatever humanity you've lost. She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Humanity? From someone who hoards money while people struggle? You're a hypocrite, Linda. A selfish old hypocrite. The officers led her away before I could respond, but I wouldn't have anyway. There was nothing left to say to someone who had lost the ability to see other people as anything more than obstacles or opportunities. Richard's situation was more complicated. The police took him downtown for questioning, but Judge Morrison had already agreed to represent him, and there was talk of reduced charges in exchange for his cooperation with the prosecution. Will you be all right tonight? Detective Martinez asked as the scene began to wind down. Do you have somewhere to stay? I'll go home, I said. To my house, my real home. Carol Patterson stepped forward. I'm driving you, Linda. You shouldn't be alone tonight. Actually, said Mrs. Chen, who had been quietly cleaning up the broken champagne glass, why don't you come stay with me tonight? We can have tea and talk or just sit quietly. Whatever you need. I looked around at the faces of my friends and neighbors. They weren't looking at me with pity anymore, or with the careful concern people show around the elderly and frail. They were looking at me with respect, with admiration for what I'd done. For the first time in months, I felt like myself again. Thank you all, I said. But I think I need to go home. I need to be in my own space, to process everything that's happened. Then I'm staying with you, Carol declared. At least for tonight. I didn't argue. The truth was, I didn't want to be alone either. Not yet. The drive back to my house was quiet. Carol kept glancing at me as if she expected me to fall apart now that the immediate crisis was over. But I felt calmer than I had in months. The constant underlying anxiety that had been eating at me was gone, replaced by a strange sense of peace. "Linda," Carol said as we pulled into my driveway, "can I ask you something?" "Of course. How long have you suspected?" I thought about it as I unlocked my front door, the same door I'd walked through thousands of times over the past 30 years. How long had I known deep down that something was wrong? "Probably longer than I wanted to admit," I said finally. "The symptoms started around Christmas, but I kept making excuses. It's normal to feel tired, to be forgetful sometimes. It's normal for adult children to drift away from their parents. I didn't want to believe that my own son could wish me harm." We went into the kitchen, and I put on the kettle for tea. Normal, everyday actions that felt precious after coming so close to never doing them again. "What made you finally face the truth?" Hearing Stephanie say I wouldn't live long enough to enjoy their success, there was such certainty in her voice, such knowledge. It wasn't a wish or a prediction. It was a plan. Carol shook her head. "I can't believe Richard went along with it. That sweet little boy who used to help you in the garden. People change," I said sadly. "Or maybe they just reveal who they really were all along. I don't know which is worse." We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Richard had done his homework, where James and I had shared morning coffee for 30 years, where I'd made the decision to fight back against the people who wanted me dead. "What happens now?" Carol asked. It was a good question. My life had been turned upside down in a single day. My son was facing criminal charges. My daughter-in-law was going to prison. The family I thought I had was gone, revealed as an elaborate fiction built on greed and manipulation. But as I sat in my quiet kitchen, surrounded by familiar things, I realized that maybe that wasn't entirely true. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. The caller ID showed Richard's cell phone number. "Should I answer it?" I asked Carol. "That's up to you." I picked up the phone. "Hello, Richard." "Mom." His voice was thick with tears. "I'm so sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry for everything." "Where are you?" "At the police station. They're releasing me tonight, but there will be charges. Judge Morrison says probably accessory to attempted murder, conspiracy, something like that. I'll likely go to prison." "Good," I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. "Good? You were willing to watch your mother die for money, Richard. You need to face the consequences of that choice." A long pause. "You're right. I do. Mom, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I need you to know that I love you. Somewhere underneath all the greed and selfishness, I still love you." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of 38 years of motherhood, of hopes and dreams and disappointments. "I know you do, sweetheart. And I love you too. That's why this hurts so much. Is there any chance we can fix this? Someday?" The question hung between us. Could a relationship survive attempted murder? Could a mother forgive a son who had been willing to poison her for inheritance money? "I don't know," I said honestly. "Maybe. If you truly change, if you get help, if you spend years proving that you're sorry, maybe someday we can find a way back to each other. But Richard, it will never be the same. We can't go back to the way things were." "I understand. Thank you for even considering it." After I hung up, Carol and I sat in silence for a while, sipping our tea and processing the enormity of what had happened. "Do you really think you might forgive him?" she asked eventually. "He's my son," I said simply. "That doesn't excuse what he did, but it doesn't disappear either. If he truly repents, if he does the work to become a better person, then maybe. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean pretending this never happened." 3 months later, I stood in my garden, planting the spring bulbs that would bloom next year. Tulips and daffodils and crocuses, flowers that would push through the dark earth when winter ended, proving that life always finds a way to renew itself. Stephanie had been sentenced to 12 years in prison for conspiracy to commit murder and 2 counts of attempted murder. The investigation had revealed that she'd been slowly poisoning me for months, adding small amounts of digitalis to food she prepared for me. They'd also reopened the investigation into her first husband's death. Richard had been sentenced to 5 years, but would likely serve only 2 with good behavior. Judge Morrison had argued successfully that he'd been manipulated, and that his cooperation with the prosecution deserved consideration. I visited him once a month at the minimum security facility where he was serving his time. The conversations were awkward, painful, but slowly we were building something new between us. Not the easy relationship we'd had before, but something more honest, more aware of how precious and fragile family bonds really are. Mrs. Henderson, I looked up from my planting to see Detective Martinez walking up my front path. She was smiling, which was usually a good sign. Detective, this is a pleasant surprise. I wanted to update you on the Morrison investigation. We got the results back from the medical examiner. David Morrison, Stephanie's first husband, had indeed died of digitalis poisoning. The levels found in his preserved tissue samples were consistent with deliberate overdose, not accidental ingestion or therapeutic use. She'll be charged with first-degree murder in his death, Detective Martinez said. With the new evidence, she's looking at life in prison without the possibility of parole. I nodded, feeling a strange mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Justice for David Morrison and his family, but also the final confirmation that I'd married my son to a serial killer. How are you doing, Mrs. Henderson? Really? It was a question people asked me often now. How was I doing after nearly being murdered by my own family? How was I coping with the knowledge that my son had been willing to watch me die? I'm surviving, I said, wiping dirt from my hands. Some days are harder than others, but I'm surviving. That's all any of us can do. After she left, I continued working in my garden, thinking about survival and renewal and the strange ways life surprises us. I was alone now in a way I hadn't been since James died, but it was a different kind of solitude. Not the loneliness of being unwanted or forgotten, but the peace that comes from knowing exactly where you stand. My phone rang. Richard, calling from prison as he did every Sunday. Hi, Mom. Hello, sweetheart. How are you doing this week? Better, I think. I've been working with the counselor you recommended, and I think I'm starting to understand some things about myself. Such as how I let my sense of entitlement override my basic decency. How I confused loving someone with enabling their worst impulses. How I forgot that character matters more than comfort. These were the conversations that gave me hope. Not easy forgiveness or pretending the past hadn't happened, but the slow, difficult work of 2 people trying to find their way back to each other across a chasm of betrayal and pain. Mom, can I ask you something? Always. Do you ever regret not drinking the poison? I know that sounds horrible, but do you ever think your life would have been simpler if you'd just let it happen? It was a startling question, but I considered it seriously. Would it have been easier to die believing I was loved than to live knowing the truth about my family? No, I said firmly. I don't regret it. Yes, the truth was painful. Yes, discovering what you and Stephanie were planning nearly broke my heart. But Richard, I'd rather live with a difficult truth than die believing a comfortable lie, even if the truth cost you your family. I looked around my quiet house, at the photos of happier times, at the garden where I'd planted hope in the form of spring flowers. It didn't cost me my family, sweetheart. It revealed that I didn't have the family I thought I had. But maybe, if we both work hard enough, we can build something real to replace it. After we hung up, I made myself dinner and sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd planned my survival 3 months ago. Tomorrow I would volunteer at the library as I did every Tuesday. Next week I would have lunch with Carol and the other book club ladies. Next month I would visit Richard and continue the long process of rebuilding trust between us. I was 66 years old, and I was finally free. Free from the anxiety of wondering why I felt so sick all the time. Free from the confusion of being gaslit and manipulated. Free from the desperate need to earn love from people who saw me only as an obstacle to wealth. Most importantly, I was free to discover what the rest of my life could be when I wasn't spending all my energy trying to be the person others wanted me to be. As darkness fell over Maplewood, I turned on the lights in my house. All of them. Extravagantly. Wastefully, Because I was alive to enjoy them, and I had earned the right to do exactly as I pleased. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to grow and change and discover who Linda Henderson really was when she wasn't afraid of dying. Tonight, I was simply grateful to be alive to find out.